Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Maria Velasquez, I'm co-founder of the Cybersecurity Marketing Society, and I'll be your moderator for this session. Today, we're digging into a topic that I think, every cybersecurity marketer feels right now, whether it's in celebratory fields or painful fields. We're here for all of it. How do you actually earn a place in your buyer's mind and heart before they actually raise their hand? Because really, let's be honest, and I think I mentioned this in my LinkedIn post recently, by the time someone fills out our form, a lot of decisions have already been made. They have already tapped into their peer group community for, opinions on certain vendors, and they're coming with that intention, the plot problem aware, and they're ready to go. But how do you join that conversation? How do you join the chat? How do you DM their mind before they raise that hand? And that's what today's conversation is all about, preference marketing, and how brand, trust, and signals come together to get you on that shortlist early, on that Slack DM to the peer group. So we're going to unpack that today and what it takes to build awareness, credibility in the market, and in a market that's more crowded than ever. We know that, and we think about that every day, and trying to figure out how to stand out and look different and sound different. But then also the explosion of the AI generated content that we're all trying to navigate. But we'll also talk about intent signals, how to identify the right accounts earlier in the journey, how to create the kind of human authoritative content that actually grabs the attention. So it's not a theory session today. We're really focusing on what actually works. Our friends from TechnologyAdvice are going to take us through that journey today. So I'm really excited about the two that I have with me today. First, we have Tyler Lessard, CMO at TechnologyAdvice. Obviously, Tyler brings a ton of experience in building high-performing demand strategies, have been helping, and his team have been helping a lot of cybersecurity marketing teams cut through the noise. So really excited to have you here, Tyler. Thank you. And then also, we're joined by none other than Ken Underhill. I think it's not a new face for a lot of people that are in this webinar watching us. But if you don't know him, get to know him for sure. Ken is a cybersecurity industry analyst who brings a deep perspective on how buyers are evaluating vendors today and what it takes to stand out in today's market. So as usual for these webinars, it's a fireside chat, it's conversational. We will have time at the end for questions, but pop your questions throughout the webinar and we'll stop and answer them live. That's what makes this super interactive and adds value to you all. And thank you so much for taking the time of your day to be with us today. So Tyler, let's get into it. I'll hand it over to you. Tell us a little bit about you, tell us a little bit about TechnologyAdvice, and then the word of the day, the term of the day, preference marketing.
Preference marketing, which is really just smart marketing, folks. Spoiler, but it's really great to be here. It does sound fancy. Tyler Lessard, as mentioned, CMO at TechnologyAdvice. I have had a long career as a marketing leader, a demand gen marketer, and I run our own marketing team here at TechnologyAdvice. But for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are one of the leading B2B technology media publishers in the world. We own and operate more than 30 different technology media brands with a sharp focus on the cybersecurity space. So we own and operate properties such as eSecurity Planet, which is our largest dedicated site for cybersecurity. But we also operate Tech Republic, which has a huge security section and following, along with our namesake TechnologyAdvice, where we do product reviews, vendor comparisons, and buyer's guides in the cybersecurity space, as well as a number of other IT and security focused brands that reach, frankly, millions of different IT and security leaders around the world each and every day. And our job here is to help marketers like all of you reach those audiences with the right message at the right time through a variety of different programs. But most importantly, right now, what I'm really focused on is helping all of you become the preferred vendor for your buyers before they are ready to make that buying decision. And I think we all know this, we understand this concept that yes, there are a small number of folks who are actively in market, and we're all running targeted programs to try to find those hand raisers and capture them at the moment that they are looking to make a buying decision. But all the research is saying that more than ever, we need to be thinking about how we influence those potential buyers earlier in their buying journeys to ensure that we are on their shortlist before they ever raise their hand, before they ever start showing those bottom of funnel intent signals. Because once they're there, they already have a list of 3 to 5 vendors. Frankly, sometimes it's one or two that are top of mind that they are most likely going to move forward with. So if you're not on that list, you're not going to have a shot. And this is actually, like I said, this is just smart marketing. It's something we've always been thinking about as marketers. But a few things have happened that are making it more and more important right now, that are like increasing the stakes and are making our buyers even more independent than they ever have been. So that's why this is such a passionate topic for me, especially right now. We're seeing a lot of the dynamics change. And Maria, I have a slide here that just reinforces with some industry stats why I think this is so important right now. Did you want me to dive into that, or do you want me to pass it over to Ken? All right, there's the slide.
Yeah, well, actually, I love that idea. Let's hand it over to Ken. I think a nice practitioner perspective on exactly that before we dive in would be great.
Ken, a quick intro from
Sure.
yourself, my friend.
Yeah, for those that don't know me, Ken Underhill, I've been doing IT cybersecurity for over 20 years, cross corporate as a practitioner and also executive leadership, a couple of my own startups that have exited. And now I write content for TechnologyAdvice, specifically their Cybersecurity Insider newsletter and the eSecurity Planet website, so article content as well, a lot of the buyer's guides. To what Tyler is saying, earlier in the journey, the key thing here is trust, and you'll hear us kind of weave that in, throughout what we're chatting about today. But the thing is building that trust early on before they even think about, I need to find a solution to my problem, because they're going to do a lot of research. I can tell you as a buyer myself, I always reached out to my network. I always vetted everyone before I ever talked to your sales team. I've already got, like Tyler was saying, I've already got my decision made. So a lot of critical aspect here is going to be the word trust. And that's something I just want all of you to take away from this session.
I love that. I love that. And I think I shared on my recent LinkedIn post that from a cybersecurity marketing perspective, our buyer kind of pushed us towards that, right? I think the trends were there and we were seeing it coming, and it is finally here. We really can't rely on just the traditional channels to convince the buyer. There is definitely a lot more nuance and context and dark social channels and friends and chats that we want to tap into. And I think it's perfect timing to dig right in.
Yeah, there really are, Maria. And before we're going to take the slide off the screen, folks, don't worry, we're not going to PowerPoint you to death here. But before we take this off the screen, I just wanted to like reinforce a couple of the points here that are why I believe this is like really important right now and something that we all need to be like extra conscious of. One of the big reasons why we're seeing this trend, and Forrester, you can see the middle section of the screen here. Their B2B buying state of B2B buying report from last year indicated some material growth in all of these numbers. But the fact that like 92%, so pretty much every buyer out there has a short list of 3 to 5 vendors defined well before they start engaging with vendors. And it keeps moving earlier in the process. And of course, over 95% of the time they end up choosing one of those vendors. And one of the interesting things that I've seen in the market is why this is happening. And it is because the buyers, we can all relate to this, they are becoming even more self-dependent than ever. And like we all know, like 70 to 80% of the buying journey happens, in their own time before they reach out. But even more so, that's happening faster. And it's also happening with more confidence because buyers are now leveraging more industry influencers. They are leveraging a diverse range of content that every day are like feeding them information. They're reading newsletters, they're watching and listening to podcasts. But they're also, of course, using AI search, which are giving them now highly credible answers. Now we can debate that, right? We can say, oh, how credible are the AIs? But the reality is, I think we all know this, when people are asking, what are some recommended solutions for ABC, or who are the top vendors for this, they're getting answers served up by AI search engines that are increasingly confident, that they're increasingly confident in. They're sort of becoming their like micro analysts. So the reality here is that people are not only doing more research themselves, but they trust that research more. They have more inputs coming at them. They have AI to validate their assumptions. So they're making those vendor preferences with a greater degree of confidence than ever before. So that's what gets me fired up. That's the big dynamic shift I'm seeing. AI search is just like driving this home and is making it even more real for all of us. So the big question, Maria, is how the heck do we get there? How do we make sure we're on people's short list early on? How are we getting in front of them on these channels? How are we making sure we're showing up in AI search? Right? These are all the big challenges people are facing right now.
Yeah. And I think too, like a lot of marketers kind of know what we need to do, right? We understand what's actually working now. Sure, we're trying to catch up with AI and GEO and SEO and how do we show up and how do we show up as a thought leader? But I think overall, we kind of know it's just a matter of time, resources, and if you have the right sort of I guess partners too, right? Within that strategy. Like, are you tapping into all the channels, whether you have budget or not? There's definitely strategies for each type of scenario. But yeah, it's just a matter of, okay, we're going to do this. What are the resources and who do we have to help us? Yeah, so people are saying in the chat, brainwashing. Well, for some of us, for those of us that know how to hack can, yes, I guess hacker skills, but case studies, yeah, I think case studies are always great. What are some things, Tyler, that you're seeing is working for certain cybersecurity marketers right now in terms of the strategy, the type of content and channels?
Well, I agree with Kristen that brainwashing is the best approach. And that's just another name for content marketing, folks,
Yeah.
because content is really all about helping to shape their ideas, shape their perspectives, and ultimately drive like a narrative into the market. It's really about influencing purchase behavior when we take our content strategies in the right direction. It's not just about showing up in search, though that's nice and helpful. It's not just about reinforcing that like we are aligned with this category and we know what we're talking about, though that sort of credibility is important. What I'm seeing more and more, to be honest, is brands really investing in more strategic thought leadership content that's intentionally multi-channel, of course, but is really increasingly geared towards really driving and owning a market narrative. And it's really going deep in specific topics and niches. And rather than sort of having a really broad, sprawling content strategy, though that still is a nice, luxury to have for some organizations, it's about placing big bets. And it's saying, we are going to elevate our brand and drive the narrative around this specific topical area. And the more niche you can get, often the more effective it is. And that's that part of that way, as Ken alluded to, that brands are really finding an opportunity to, again, go deep in a certain area, build highly credible trust, influence the AI search engines sort of one bite at a time as they go, really digging in. And by doing that, it's allowing them to, again, go very deep and then broad within that category, within that topic. So it's own that niche by investing in research related to that very specific topic. Going now, broadening it out with video content to support that. Of course, a webinar and a case study that's really specific to that area. It's not just how this company generated a 5x ROI with us. It's how this company specifically did this and took this leap and made this big step with us as their supporting partner. And so that continues to be a very successful strategy. And we're seeing more of our customers in the cybersecurity tech space really leaning into that and saying, we want to own this topic. How do we do that? How do we go deep? And then how do we really bring it to life across a lot of different channels with experts by our sides to validate that story?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just real quick, just to add to what Tyler's saying and kind of echoing what a lot of people are saying in the chat right now around AI slop and the granularity of content. I think a simple example is going more operational. So working with your SMEs, your sales engineers, even product managers, if that's all you have at your organization, to get very granular use cases. So let me just give you an example instead of just being generic here. Let's say that your company uses AI agents to help with compliance. That's kind of your niche. So generically, you would talk about like automating compliance and how can we automate workflows and continuous compliance and all these buzzwords, but nobody cares. What people are actually looking for is you saying, okay, if you're doing like a HIPAA audit, here's exactly where our solution can help you in the workflow. Here's where you can, have some a la carte, right? So here's where you can plug in, or you can say, no, I don't want to use it there. I want a human in the loop. So those types of situations. Also talking about, Tyler and I did a past webinar where we talked about some trends. Of course, AI was a big one on that. And so with that, getting very granular on integrations, because that's a key question of your buyers. Like, how does this break stuff, or how does this integrate with my current tech stack? So when you're thinking of these use cases, working with your SMEs, instead of just sharing case studies, which was mentioned by a lot of you in chat, those are usually pretty generic. Like, okay, company X used us and they saved, $70,000 or whatever, blah blah blah. That's still too generic. Those are helpful, those are beneficial, but get granular. Like, what was their tech stack? What did it look like? How exactly did your solution plug into what they're doing in their day to day? And use actual verbiage that your target audience would actually understand. So again, that's where it's critical to work with your SMEs. Like Meryl's in the chat, she's a very well-known expert in cybersecurity. So people like that, tapping into their knowledge, but getting very, very granular to what Tyler's saying on specific workflows and speaking the language that they're using. I just want to highlight that because it's not AI slap we're trying to do. It's not generic granularity. It's very, very specific to what your audience is looking for. And you can get a lot of that with your SMEs and then also your existing customers. You can get a lot of that content. And then what Tyler was saying, taking that content in different formats across the board. Someone else, I think Laura mentioned in chat, spreading it around to different channels. But again, you want to get very granular, own a category, own a specific niche part of that category. And that's really how you stand out early on in the buying process.
Yeah. I love that. And I think it makes a lot of sense to dig deep into the technical details of the product. Why not? Because if we're talking about digging into the intent signals and identifying warm accounts that are in market to buy, they're most likely looking for that kind of information. They're not looking for your ebook on 5 best practices. They're looking at what are the integrations and what's the time to value, how many people is it going to take, and how long is it going to take to fully implement this into their current tech stack and that sort of thing. So I just want to double click on that type of content since we're being super specific. Where does that kind of content work best from a channel perspective, whether it's organic, owned channels, or third party that you're paying for the placement?
I mean, yes and yes and yes. And by the way, you're welcome to stop sharing the slide if
Okay.
you'd like, unless anybody in the chat wants us to leave it up there. But I show us your faces. So I mean, absolutely, we're like no surprise. We keep seeing that like diversity in terms of formats and channels reigns supreme in modern marketing, and things aren't changing from that perspective. And I think what's interesting is the way that folks are researching now is actually bringing some of this need to be very specific, very niche, almost like bottom of funnel in your content strategy, all the way through the funnel, like bringing more specificity, more proof right up into your more what we consider like top of funnel channels and top of funnel marketing. And the reason that I say that is there's a number of indicators that this is sort of happening in the market where, again, people are getting very specific with, to go back to like AI prompts and search, right? It's not just, folks aren't just, hey, what are the top 5 firewall solutions, right? Like that's, people like even like before they're ready to buy, when they're just sort of passively learning, they're getting in there. They're like, what are the top 5 next gen firewall solutions with ABC for this specific thing in this specific area where I have this specific problem or need? And they're finding the information, right? And AI is helping them find that information because it can do what we couldn't do previously, which is, index and search and synthesize like literally, thousands and thousands of destination points and find the right information. And so I think what's happening is we're starting to see the need to, both have like stronger marketing all through the funnel, stronger content strategy throughout. But again, that credibility, that authority, that also specificity, at each stage. It's not just about, hey, top of funnel is like sort of high level and pretty general. And as we move to the bottom, we get more specific. We add customers, we add, sort of case study proof points. I just don't think that's the case anymore. And I think we need to be thinking about, again, how do we like build the narrative we're trying to build and activate it across the funnel, in top of funnel and bottom of funnel, and be really intentional about how specific we are, be really intentional in involving people like Meryl, sorry, and other influencers and experts and creators like Ken in the market to support that narrative in top of funnel, videos where it might be an interview where we're talking generally about the topic, but it's a very specific topic.
Yeah.
Or it might be, again, moving down to how do we involve a customer to bring that specific story to life on how they did ABC with this specific caveat in a webinar, in some kind of a testimonial video, or in some written piece of content. So I think it is interesting that like the market seems to be moving in that direction. And there are sort of all these underlying, reasons for that. But people are just expecting that higher quality of information, that more specific information, and more proof in the pudding, if you will, because they are more sort of skeptical of general content than ever before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, sometimes we over-engineer this whole, content strategy based on funnel stages. And I mean, I don't know how many people that's, perfectly worked for as a formula, like stage to stage, and have been able to identify from a reporting perspective what each content piece has done. I think the over-engineering definitely clouds our strategy and our decision making when it comes to what content, what type, and what channel. I think at the end of the day, if it's very helpful content, if it's not self-serving all the time, and even if it's a content piece that has product information, it should just be helpful first before it can be salesy. And I think immediately you establish that trust and you stay top of mind, right? Across that sort of 80% of the journey before they raise their hand. Yeah, exactly, Ken. Helpful and shareable. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely plus one that. And I think one of the ways, our content strategies, our brand strategies, like the marketing earlier in the funnel, if you will, does have the risk of becoming both more complex and more challenging, because we're thinking, oh, we have to like, it's so much more broad than, like bottom of funnel marketing. Actually, in some cases, a little bit easier, because like we can be really targeted and really specific to this like late stage of the buying journey. But as we push ourselves to be smarter marketers early and building preference early on, it can feel overwhelming. I know it does for me at times, or it's like, oh my gosh, we have to do all these things. Like we have to talk about all these different topics. We got to get them on all these different channels. We got to find people in all these different places that may or may not be looking for things right now. And it can be overwhelming. And I think back to what we were sort of alluding to earlier is really honing in on, hey, we don't have to like own the conversation around everything, right? It's if we can figure out, this is the really specific narrative we want to drive this year. This is, we want to be known for this. We want to own this topic. And we really want to align ourselves with this key trend. Now, how is it that we sort of activate that, right? And coming back to like, hey, how can we help our audience with this really specific thing, right? How can we help them understand what it means, what a path to success looks like? Who are the different like people in your business that need to be bought in on it? Who are some of the experts in that really specific area that we can tap into to share their wisdom and experience? And how can we be genuinely helpful there and activate it in a variety of different channels? And that can sometimes, alleviate some of that complexity and that pressure where you go, we don't have to be everything to everybody. We want to be the most helpful, the most relevant, the most timely in this specific area. And we can like activate it in a number of different ways.
Yeah.
And we can find the partners, the channels that are most likely to service those folks. We don't have to just go broad and try to tap into every possible cybersecurity publication or go to every event. You're still going to go to RSAC, of course, but we can go like now again, where is the watering hole for folks who care about this topic or this specific area? And I think that can help folks alleviate some of that pressure around moving more top of funnel and not trying to do everything all at once.
Totally. Also, that was way too soon, Tyler. RSA is only like a week and a half ago. we're all still recovering. There's still a lot of PTSD.
You mean it's only 11 months away, Maria? That's
Exactly. We're already flipping. Yeah, way too soon. I want to just double click on that point, but kind of bring in a couple of questions from the audience. I know Laura had a great one that ties into exactly what you were sort of digging into, is how do we balance the content creation for practitioner versus business leader? And that is, in a way, kind of honing in on one either use case or vertical, or in this particular scenario or question is the persona. And I don't know how much of the internal buy-in we need to do as marketers in order to actually have that as the decision of, okay, this is how we're moving forward in content. Or are there opportunities to have mini experiments, gather data, and bring back, the findings for that bigger internal decision? So what do you say, Tyler? And then also maybe we bring in Ken for the business buyer versus the technical practitioner here.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear Ken's perspective on this. But the one area I'll chime in on here is a great question, because a lot of us are thinking more and more about marketing to buying groups than just individual buyers. And that's been a big trend, of course, generally in B2B marketing for a number of years now. And again, a lot of good reasons for that. There's a lot of, good indications that that's the smart thing to be doing right now. And so I think, sort of pairing those ideas together where you can say, okay, we really want to focus in, maybe Q2, Q3 is like, we're really going to go deep on this specific topical area. Here's the narrative we're going to drive. And now, again, instead of trying to go too broad, we're going to focus on that. And we're going to say, how do we activate this for the potential buying committee? And we say, how do we activate this and make it as helpful, as meaningful, as relevant as possible for these two practitioner roles, this leadership role? And hey, maybe there's even a piece of content for the CFO that's going to help them understand the business case and the justification piece of it. And I think that's, again, sort of where you start deep, but then you go broad within that. That's part of that story of saying we can activate this in different ways for different members of the buying committee. How much you do and how much you invest in, like, for the practitioner versus for the business leaders, is obviously, it's always going to depend on the nature of your business, how much you need to influence one versus the other, maybe where you see the greatest opportunity or white space today. But I would also, be really intentional about talking to your clients if, if you're able to like really understand from them, who is it that's involved in these conversations, and understanding who that buying committee is, what their relative sort of priority is in the process, and being mindful of that. So I think you got to hedge your bets based on your specific use case, your specific products and buyers, but it's the right question to be asking. And I think being intentional about that, and I'm seeing a lot of folks do this really well now. They're actually, for real doing it, not just talking about it, of saying, like, how do we cater to the buying committee? How do we create pieces of content for those different stakeholders? How do we find them in different watering holes because they may engage in different places online? And then maybe even how do we create like an integrated, centralized hub where those different pieces exist and people can come and invite their colleagues and find the information that they're looking for? So great question. It's going to depend on every unique business. But I think this is a way to attack it by focusing on an area and then being, how can I help these three different people and answer the questions they care about most?
Totally. Yeah, I know, Meryl, I was kind of thinking the same thing too. It's really tough to assume what the buying committee is going to look like, because literally every company, every account, every industry is completely different, right? I think it can include the CFO, or it may not. It may be the IT department that's overseeing security, or maybe security that's separate from IT but reporting to the CIO. It's like an absolute spectrum of different committees, and I think the safest bet for me is to create a little bit of content for each one, and it doesn't have to be long form content. Anyway, we're seeing better engagement with video and short form content, so it should be, even if you're a one person marketing team, with the help of internal SMEs, with the help of a little bit of AI to get you started, you can have some good helpful pieces of content that speaks to each one. You don't want to take the chance because you just
you can include, like, you can intentionally kind of have like I'm not sure what the right word is for this, but sometimes what I will do is I'll have like content series that are intentionally called a practical guide to X. And
Yeah.
then there's the strategic guide to X. And they might be catering again, like the practical guides or really whether they're guides or videos or whatever. But there's sort of like a framing to say, like, this is intended for folks in this sort of role. This is intended for folks in this sort of role. And it gives you a kind of a simple template and framework to go back to. But I would, yeah, I would caution against assuming that maybe more senior people aren't as technical, and it might be the case in some cases. In other cases, it may not. Again, you really just have to, hedge your bets on what you know about your audience. But I think when you can create sort of a more intentional content mix for that specific area, you can do a bit of both, right? Where you can say like, hey, we're going to do something that's a little bit simpler, a little bit higher level, that's going to cater to people who want to just like dip in. And we're going to have that one link out to, and here is, if you're interested in diving deeper, here's our like next level down. And I think, especially, in the security space, we see people do that. So some of our best customers with their, yeah, what we're seeing is they have that sort of like full funnel of content with a little bit that's practitioner, a little bit that's decision maker. And again, they make them available in this in places that it's easy to cross discover and let people kind of move at their own pace or hop in where they want.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah had a really good question about how to help small businesses overcome the perception and risk of working with a smaller company. And obviously, our industry is full of startups, stealth mode, pre-seed, all of them that are bringing some amazing products. But yeah, we do see that the cybersecurity practitioners sometimes, if they don't have that risky early adopter persona and they'll try anything, they do kind of veer towards the other side of the spectrum where it's like, oh no, how long has this company been around? Does it have integrations like Ken says? What are their certifications? What are their track record? That sort of thing. How have you worked with smaller startups that are just getting started, and what type of content has helped with that kind of perception?
Ken, I'd love to hear your thoughts on on part of this. I know that you see a lot of that of like small companies trying to build credibility, and how are you feeling about that these days?
Yeah, so I think Maria brought up some of that of, getting those early adopters was, let's say you don't have that yet, you've literally just started. Speaking for my own companies I've had, the key really was talking about limitations, which I think Meryl might have mentioned in the chat. We keep plugging Meryl on here, but I think she was the one that mentioned it in the chat. A lot of companies will pretend like they're the cat's meow, so to speak, of like, there's nothing wrong with your solution. And as a technical practitioner, there's a lot wrong with whatever solution anyone has on this call. That being said, I think the easiest way for like a small company is to just address that issue up front. We're like, okay, yes, we're smaller. We don't have, X, Y, Z, but what we do very well is, ABC, right? Like just address that problem up front in your content. It's painful. You may get pushback. In fact, you will get pushback from senior leadership. But I think the more you can address it up front of talking about what you do well, and maybe there, maybe limitations, like if you're a small company, why are you going after an enterprise? Honestly, at this point, you should be looking at mid-market, looking to subcontract off an enterprise. You shouldn't be trying to go get Google, tomorrow, right? You're not big enough to fulfill what Google needs usually in most cases. So I think being realistic with yourselves, having that realistic conversation with your leadership and talking about, okay, we need to address our limitations up front. So that way people aren't trying to find those limitations behind the scenes, to what Meryl mentioned in the chat earlier of reaching out to our networks and peeling back the layers because you're not giving us that information in your content. So I think you really need to just be upfront about that of like, we're a small company, we just started, this is what these are some of the limitations we have realistically because we're small or we only focus on this area of the market, and then address that, but then also talk about what we do very well compared to a massive company like a CrowdStrike, right? Or a Splunk or whomever, because a big company doesn't have the nimbleness. I don't know if nimbleness is a word, but I just made it up if it's not. But the nimbleness of a startup, right? So that's a key value prop that you have as an early stage startup that they maybe don't have. You know, you can, like when I started my education company, I was able to build bespoke content at a reasonable rate where like a bigger company couldn't do that, right? Because they had investors and all that stuff, and I was bootstrapped. So that allowed me to get into a lot of organizations where, you know, a big company just couldn't. They couldn't make it fiscally work, you know. So figure out what your, you know, key value props are, but also figure out what your potential limitations are that a buyer would be asking in their mind, and answer that question for them so they don't have to go answer it elsewhere. And that again goes back to what I mentioned at the start of this, that builds that trust, right? Because you're being transparent with them on what, you know, the potential limitations are. That really goes a long ways in building that trust. And a lot of people will give you a chance at that point if you're just honest with them up
Yeah,
front.
absolutely. Also, founder-led brand building is gold for those, you know, companies that are just starting. A lot of people want to see kind of like that founder story. Where are these founders coming from? If it's just one or two, put them on video, put them on social, put them everywhere, because it humanizes the brand. And like you said, Ken, there are some people that want to take a chance on you, that want to feel like they're part of the journey from the beginning. And hey, tap into those early adopters. Those are going to be your best, you know, success stories in the beginning, just to get you started until you are ready for, you know, bigger markets and bigger companies.
A few things I can build on that from Ken's conversation there, and I think going back to that question on like what specific types of content or other strategies are we seeing those types of companies win with. Um, my recommendation is in terms of like as you're turning that message into content, the three pillars for those smaller companies to me are specificity, which we've talked about, which is, here's what we are like, we're going to focus on this. We're not trying to talk about being the be all end all platform. We're not trying to talk about everything in security. We want to establish ourselves as the authority in this very specific thing because that's what we do better than anybody else. So specificity. Number two is transparency, and it aligns with sort of Ken, what you were talking to of transparency can come in a lot of different ways, but in your content, that becomes really, really important as a smaller business because people will inherently not trust your content and your message as much. And so the more transparent you can be, and you can be transparent not only in the words you use and in the type of content, but as asked earlier, like where does video come into the mix here? Video can be a great superpower for smaller companies who want to be able to show, not just tell, exactly how to do something, how to accomplish something. Maybe even again, right down into like, how does our product actually work? Like here it is, like you can see it. Like here's a video walking through, like this is actually what it's doing. And so I think there are ways to be more transparent, and that's important. And then I think the third, specificity, transparency, and then the third is proof. Probably no surprise to folks listening. But the more that you can activate the stories of your customers, and again, don't be worried about trying to find, again, the largest company in the world to validate your message. If you have small customers, hey, that's great. That's fine. Find the right people that are the individuals who are like the right persona that you're trying to sell to, right? If your power user at one of your customers is a security analyst, right? That's totally fine. It doesn't have to be the chief security officer or a CTO or a CIO, right? If you can find those folks, that again makes it more transparent, more believable when you're finding those real people of like, this company is saving me like 30 hours a week and well, that's a lot. They're saving me 30 hours a month and they're helping me achieve this incremental thing. And I found this thing faster because of them. That's great. So proof, transparency, and specificity are your friends when you're a smaller business. The last thing I'll mention on this note is that you are typically going to have greater dependency on outbound marketing to build that brand preference because it's going to be a lot harder for you. Likely you're smaller, likely you're earlier in your stage to influence the AI search, to influence SEO, to show up organically where these folks are mingling, to get influencers to talk positively about you or at all. So you're going to be a little bit more dependent on outbound channels to get this content out there. Look for things that you can get decent scale, for decent bang for your buck. Things like newsletters can be great ways to get your brand out there. Of course, doing smart things at events, sponsoring relevant podcasts in your community. Those sorts of things can work as great ways to get your brand out there, get it associated with the right thing, and try to drive people into that messaging. So those are some of the things I would think about as a smaller business.
And if it all fails, TikTok. No, I'm just kidding.
That's right. Yeah.
Before we move on to the next point, or we can grab a couple of questions, I'm just going to launch a poll. Just out of curiosity, wanted to see kind of engage where everybody is in their content journey, what's holding you back, and differentiating and identifying warm accounts. So I'm just going to launch the first one, but we can continue talking while people are answering that, and I'll share the results to that.
So no, all of the above?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above. That's true. I'm pretty sure a lot of people want to click all of them. But would be interesting to see what's the leading one. Okay, so let's see. We didn't really cover intent signals a lot in all of this. Obviously, we covered the type of content, the channels, but can we just talk through intent signals? I know they were very hot 3-4 years ago. I know that some have tried, and I know some have experimented, and some have failed, some have succeeded. What are we seeing today in terms of intent signals now that AI has entered the chat? Because I feel like that's definitely making a whole different scene for marketers and how to, I guess, not just utilize, but how to read some of those signals across accounts and warm accounts that are actively looking for solutions and products in their space. So yeah, if you want to start, Tyler, and Ken, happy for you to jump in.
Yeah, sure. I think that intent signals, I think continue to have an important place in what we're doing as marketers, and I think there's a couple key messages here to sort of align with what we're talking about. Number one is, if you are like using intent signals as your primary marketing driver, again, you're going to have challenges if you're not building that brand preference earlier, to make sure that, hey, because like once you get that intent signal, if you start reaching out to a company, if it's the first time they've heard of you, your chances of breaking through the noise there are going to be very little in most cases. And so, I think again, an intent strategy has to be paired with this, sort of more brand-led demand as we move forward. But that being said, we are seeing, some really interesting progression with, how intent signals are being used, in many ways, thanks to either AI being used by the intent data providers to provide, I'd say, more timely, more accurate, more relevant intent data. It's always hard to know what some vendors are actually doing behind the scenes. But I know here at TechnologyAdvice, we've made actually really leaps and bounds with respect to how we use intent data to target, again, those in-market buyers, in addition to hitting them earlier in the funnel. And AI systems are absolutely, helping brands like us and Ken, for you as well, it can correlate lots of different information and can find these interesting patterns that are helping you sort of sift through the different intent signals and go, actually, this is probably the highest, priority ones. It's almost like ranking your intent. So it has, very strong ability to do that. The other thing that I'm seeing, which is something we're doing, again, behind the scenes for our customers, but all of you can be thinking about as well, is we're finding AI to be a really helpful partner, if you will, in helping to identify those potential members of the buying committees at organizations, as one simple example. So, when we see an intent signal, like, Acme is researching threat detection solutions, and they've been recently reviewing these 3 different product reviews, these 4 vendor comparisons. Those are great bottom of funnel signals, intent signals that we see, and we generate those as well from our network. But then where AI plays a great role is going, okay, at Acme, who are the most likely stakeholders and buying committee members for a threat detection solution? And we're then using it to identify at that company, using lots of different data sources that we have access to. Here are 20 different people at that organization who might be involved in a decision here. And then it can actively, of course, recommend messaging for each of those different stakeholders. It can really drive an outbound engagement strategy. So I think there are some interesting things. I think the intent signals themselves still have their place. Where I see a lot of the value is how we bundle that into these other things that we're doing, how we use that intent signal to then do smarter outreach to those organizations using AI to pair it up with other signals to go, actually, these are the intent signals that seem the most relevant to me right now, and we're going to activate those. So that's kind of how I'm seeing it evolve today.
I love
Hopefully
that.
that makes sense.
I love that. Yeah. I think a lot of the biggest thing that we've been missing in intent signals or is the trust and the confidence in the signal itself. And so I love that from your perspective across the technology advice ecosystem, that there is first party signals that you can validate, right? And trust 100% that, okay, this person read this article and then clicked on this and then compared these four vendors. That to me is I don't know. I feel like that's a lot more trustworthy than intent signals that we've gotten from intent signal tools, which we will not name. So I'm glad that you covered that. I'm going to share some of the results from the first poll. Not surprisingly, 50% is struggling to break through the noise. I think a lot of us are, trying to figure that out. But what's really interesting is to me, the focus on capturing existing demand. And so would love to, like, if we could take just 2 minutes, and I know we have 13 minutes left. What is that piece of content and what is that beautiful channel mix that helps capture existing demand for marketers from what you're seeing across your customer base?
Well, of course, there is no one channel to rule them all. And what's challenging for all of us as marketers today is we know people are engaging in lots of different places, and we kind of have to maximize our surface areas in some ways to make sure that we are reaching those people in the right places. We are continuing to see webinars and virtual events continue to be very effective, especially when they're featuring people like the Ken Underhills of the world, or folks within your space that are, again, those credible, trustworthy sources and or your real customers who aren't just talking about you as a brand, but are talking about how they specifically solve certain problems. So things like webinars, virtual events continue to work well in the ecosystem. Again, we are, of course, seeing different ways of getting pieces of written content and static content out into the market. We still absolutely see, content syndication works very well for our customers, but you have to make sure you're using, again, the right vendors who are actually getting that content in front of the right people at the right time. And, it's the reality is not all content syndication vendors are created equal. And, some out there will certainly, blast your content across a massive database and will, look for signals of people engaging and pass those back as leads, which can be nice to build your database, but those aren't necessarily the people who are raising their hands. And so you want to be mindful and really understand, partners that you are working with, like who are they, not just the ICP filters, but how are they getting your content in front of the right people to influence them at the right time and get their opt-in at the moment where they are actually making a decision. I mentioned to you, earlier, one of the things that we do, not to toot our own horns, but something I'm really proud of is we're using AI now and automation to consistently monitor, again, which accounts are actively engaging in which topics across our networks and where do they appear to be in the buying journey. So as they are engaging in top of funnel news, we know that. As they're reading product reviews or buyer's guides or vendor comparisons, we know that as well. And as a content syndication vendor, we will actually target those people who are at the bottom of the funnel, who are reading the buyer's guides, who are reading the product reviews. They're the first ones we'll target with that content syndication to say, hey, this company is showing a high intent. We'll use AI to figure out who do we think are members of their buying committee, and we'll get that content in front of those people as quickly as we can. And so sometimes, again, with content syndication, you can get very different quality leads back. And again, a lot of folks will just target broad lists. Other folks will actually target those who are demonstrating real-time intent, which is going to give you a better shot at getting your content in front of the people who are actually in that decision phase. So again, I think, we see lots of different channels working, but it's really about sort of understanding the dynamics of your market. Where are my audience, what are their watering holes? Where are they engaging? And then are there partners or organic ways that I can actually try to find those people at the right time? An age-old marketing challenge, but something that I think a lot of folks are getting better and better at.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about building trust with our buyer. I think the other side of the trust is building marketers to trust content syndication vendors, intent signal vendors, to trust them when they do get that lead list delivered and sort of the context behind the leads that they're getting delivered. Because then, there is the trust that they have to build with their sales team when they're delivering those leads to them. They want to, validate and feel confident about that. So just finding the right partner for these things is very, very important. And we did some shameless plugging in the chat, of course. Why don't I just pull up that one slide that you had, Tyler, while we close things off and sort of gather final thoughts. I do have a couple more poll questions I could launch. Maybe I'll do that while you're covering last few thoughts. Let's see. Do we have any other questions in the chat that we could cover in the last few minutes?
I think there was one, I forget who listed it, but it was basically like, how do I get, I'm competing with really big companies in the GRC space. How do I get kind of into the communities and get my brand out there, et cetera? I'm assuming you have a startup that, again, I apologize. I'm not looking at the chat right now, so I don't know who asked that. But I think the way I would go about it, if I had a GRC related company and I just started it, I would focus on one area locally. So like I'm in Houston, I would focus on medical in Houston because that's a huge industry here.
Oh,
And I would become the go-to, as a small company, I would go out there, boots on the ground. I'd start building up this market because then the medical people here are going to start saying, hey, so-and-so up in Dallas and so in San Francisco that has a clinic, Ken and team are the best at, X, Y, Z. So that you've got to do that kind of grassroots marketing style. But you've got to own an area is my recommendation. Don't try to be everything to everyone. That's what like a big company can do. You're not there yet. You've got a startup. So I think, kind of to what we've been talking about, right? That granularity on your content, that, boots on the ground, that focusing on being the key thing in a certain area, whether it's local by you physically having an office there or just local of like, we're going to go after these markets right now and these specific markets in that area, that geographic area. That's really the way to do that for a startup in any space. And especially if there's like one or two like huge players in that area, you've got to go more grassroots because and also have your SMEs tap into areas like communities, Slack channels, Discord groups, where the problems with those big vendors are being discussed, because that gives you that actual insight to what I mentioned earlier. Like there's always a problem with a big vendor. Usually it's customer service. It's too much complexity. It's, they break a lot of things with integrations. They don't offer enough customization for us, what we need, right? They've got a lot of out of the box, but it's not out of the box for our specific use case. As a smaller company, you usually can do more of that stuff, right? And you can get like, again, going back to my startup, the most recent one, I won on bespoke and I won on customer service, where big competitors couldn't do it. They just couldn't do it. And of course, a little bit on pricing, but I was still expensive, but because I'm Ken and I like to be expensive. But the two main areas where I really crushed competition were customer service and bespoke content. That's where we really, really were able to win. And we focus on specific niches. Like I'm a former nurse, for those that didn't know, and I didn't say that in my intro. So I'm able to focus on healthcare a lot. And we focused here on Houston healthcare that needed security training. And we were able to own that category as a startup. So I think that's really what you need to do. You need to do that more bootstrap mindset and figure out like how you can differentiate from that big competition out there and get yourself in those conversations. Leverage your SMEs, leverage social media, leverage the communities that you can't get in as a marketer. Because I'm part of like some Discord and Slack communities that are only for cybersecurity buyers. None of you on this call can get in well, maybe Meryl can get in there because she's a SME. But for a general marketer, you can't get in those conversations because they don't want to be sold to. Kind of like the Cybersecurity Marketing Society that Gianna shared. That's for marketers. Like if you're a salesy person, you can't get in there. right? They gatekeep on that stuff. So you just have to think outside the box. You have to be very nimble. Nimbleness is apparently a real word. Thank you, Gianna, for verifying that. But that's really the key for someone that's trying to, like, how do we get past our big competition out there and get in those conversations?
Love that. Subreddits. Go hit those subreddits. Find out what your competition's doing wrong. I love it. All right. Awesome. Well, I
There
think
was a related question around building a watering hole versus
yeah,
tapping into those existing ones. And
yeah,
again, another age-old, well, at least maybe 15-year-old marketing, question and challenge. Then, I think as per some of the threading in there, building your own watering hole is a very powerful thing, but it's very, very difficult, to do and sustain. And I love the one comment that, if you are trying to really build your own audience that you're actively engaging over time, you need to invest in it. You need to be prepared to be there, to show up, to add value consistently, and to like have folks who are pretty dedicated to it in order for it to really become something that's meaningful for your market. You also need to find that unique, that unique white space, because there are a lot of different places that folks can go to get information and communities now. It's very, very difficult because it is so democratized. So you need to be really intentional about, why would somebody show up here, daily, weekly, monthly, whatever that frequency is? What is unique about this space I'm going to create? And there are different ways you can navigate that, but it is, it is a big lift and something you need to be ready to invest in. And then obviously tapping into existing watering holes gives you that faster, I'd say less expensive in the near term reach, but of course, less control. But I think, if you can dabble in both, it can be a winning strategy. But yeah, don't underestimate the effort to really build a successful watering hole. But again, if you're doing it, like Ken said, start specific. Don't try to be everything to everybody. Find those your birds of a feather, and just like lean in there and be their absolute go-to resource before you try to go bigger.
love that. What an amazing way to end this. Thank you all so much. Thanks to all the attendees. The chat was hopping. Thank you, like Gianna said, the honorary panelists, Meryl, Seema, Laura. Thank you so much. These were all amazing questions. Of course, thank you, Tyler and Ken, for spending an hour with us, diving into this topic. I hope you all found it. I hope all you attendees found it valuable. We will be sending the recording after this and the slides. And of course, DM Tyler. He's offered his DM, so DM him if you just want to chat marketer to marketer. I didn't offer, you did. I can vouch that he's a great amount of fun, and he's an amazing marketer to just bounce ideas off of, without sort of the vendor transactional relationship. So thank you all so much. Thank you again, TechnologyAdvice. Thanks for being a great partner for us and for about bringing this valuable session for the community. And thanks, everyone. We'll see you on the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.